He lost his leg serving his country. At the airport, he lost something else. Until one man quietly gave it back. "Excuse me, sir. Are you flying alone today?" The question came from the Delta desk agent, a young woman with red curls and tired eyes, more out of habit than necessity. It was barely 5:30 in the morning at Jackson International Airport in Mississippi, and the terminal was still stretching itself awake. Retired Staff Sergeant Darnell R. Jennings nodded once, slow but certain. "Yes, ma'am." He slid his weathered military ID across the counter. The agent glanced at the card, then back at him. He was tall, at least 6'2", and carried himself like a man who didn't need to say much to command a room. Still, the slight drag of his left leg gave him away. Each step came with a soft click, not quite metal, not quite man. She smiled politely, but her eyes lingered just a second too long on the pant leg that didn't quite fall naturally. "Thank you for your service," she said quickly, handing back the ID. "Always," Darnell replied, folding it back into the wallet like he'd done 1,000 times. His duffel bag was the same one he carried through 3 tours overseas. A dark brown canvas pouch stitched with army green thread. No patches, no rank, just wear and tear. The zippers jingled with each step as he made his way toward the TSA checkpoint. The airport speakers crackled to life, with a mechanical voice announcing early boardings to Dallas and Phoenix. Darnell glanced at his boarding pass. Gate B12. Still had time. He moved slowly, deliberately, taking his place in the growing security line. A toddler ahead of him was wailing. Somewhere behind him, a businessman muttered into a Bluetooth earpiece. And in between them all stood Darnell, quiet, still, unnoticed by most. But every once in a while, someone's eyes would land on his leg, their stare dropping like a pebble into water before looking away again. That didn't bother him. What bothered him were the ones who thought they were slick, snapping a photo when they thought he wasn't looking, or whispering to someone behind a hand that wasn't doing a good job hiding anything. He adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder and shifted his weight. His left leg, a carbon fiber prosthetic from the knee down, always let him know when it was going to be a long day. And today felt like one. The line moved. He got closer to the scanner, the last person before the conveyor belt. That's when he saw him. TSA agent Corbin, young, cocky, pale-skinned, with a buzz cut that hadn't seen a good fade in months. He had that look, the one Darnell had seen on certain men back in the service. Not the dangerous kind, but the petty kind. The kind who wanted power without having earned it. The kind who pulled rank over rules. "Step forward," Corbin called out, not bothering to look Darnell in the eye. Darnell placed his duffel bag on the belt and stepped through the metal detector. "Beep. Here we go." Corbin raised an eyebrow without a trace of concern. "Gonna have to go again, old man." Darnell turned, calm as ever, and walked back through the arch. The beep came again. Now Corbin looked interested. That's why. Looks like we got a robot leg situation." He chuckled, too loud for the early hour. "Terminator, huh?" People in the line looked up. Some tilted their heads like they had misheard. Others looked away quickly. No one laughed with him. Darnell didn't flinch. "Combat injury, Kandahar, 2007. Corbin gave a lazy nod. "Still gonna have to check that out. You know, policy." He tapped his walkie. "Need a supervisor at lane 3. Got a bionic vet with a hot leg." Someone in the line muttered, "That's not right." Darnell turned his head slightly, scanning the people behind him. A teenage girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. An older man with a newspaper frowned. But no one stepped forward. Not that he needed them to. He'd fought harder battles with worse odds. But the thing about dignity? It doesn't always make a sound when it walks into a room. Corbin leaned against the podium like it was his porch. "So what's under there? Steel, titanium? You got some kind of clearance, or do we need to unscrew the whole thing?" Darnell didn't answer right away. He'd heard jokes before, from other soldiers mostly. That was different. This wasn't brotherhood. This was performance. A stage in front of tired travelers with a man looking for a laugh. "Left leg, below the knee. Improvised explosive device," Darnell finally said. Corbin's smirk faltered just a touch. Not gone, just slightly dented. "Yeah, well, I'm still going to need you to step aside." Another TSA officer, older and quieter, approached. Her name badge read R. Boudreaux, and her posture said she didn't enjoy being summoned for foolishness. She walked with the professionalism of someone who had already had 2 cups of coffee and no time for nonsense. "What's the issue?" she asked, glancing at the scanner logs. Metal leg, Corbin said with a shrug. Bat it off. Darnell raised the cuff of his left pant leg just enough to show the matte black prosthetic. Sleek, military issued, no shine. No need for bells and whistles. Boudreaux looked at Darnell's face, not his leg. His face. You retired service? She asked. He nodded. Army, staff sergeant, 8 years active, another 5 with the reserves. She sighed through her nose, not at him, at the situation. We'll just do a manual pat-down, sir. Shouldn't take long. Corbin opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but Boudreaux cut a look his way that closed it for him. Darnell followed her to the side. The blue privacy partition looked like it hadn't been cleaned in days. He stood in silence while she explained each step of the pat-down. I apologize for the inconvenience, she said, her voice quieter now. Some of us forget respect when it's early. No need to apologize for him, Darnell replied. She gave a single nod and got to work. The thing about Darnell was, he didn't complain. Not about pain, not about time, not even about disrespect. He'd learned a long time ago that some people didn't know how to treat what they couldn't understand, and some just didn't care. But that didn't mean it didn't sting. While Boudreaux checked the seams of his clothes, Corbin stood off to the side, arms folded, jaw shifting like he was trying to chew boredom into bravery. Every now and then, he glanced at the line and said things like, just a few more minutes, folks, or appreciate your patience. But he never looked at Darnell again. When the pat-down ended, Boudreaux thanked him and handed back his boarding pass. Gate B12, she said gently. Darnell gave a quiet, thank you, and walked off without another word. But he didn't need to say anything. The silence around the checkpoint said enough. Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. But they watched, and that had its own weight. He made his way toward the tram that would take him to Terminal B. The cart was half full, mostly flight attendants with rolling carry-ons and airport staff getting ready for shift changes. He sat near the back, stretching his leg out slightly. The man beside him, a grounds crew worker with grease under his nails, leaned in a little. That dude at TSA, he was way out of pocket. Darnell looked over. You served? Yeah, the man said. Navy. My pops lost a leg in Desert Storm. Darnell gave a small nod, not of agreement, just understanding. Respect to your father. The man bumped his knuckles against Darnell's shoulder, nothing flashy, and said, welcome home. That meant more than the thank yous, more than the stares. It wasn't for show. The tram rolled to a slow stop. Terminal B loomed ahead. Darnell stood and grabbed his bag again. The straps had started fraying along the edges, but the thing still held. But sometimes the weight you carry isn't in your hands. It's in the way people treat you when they think nobody's watching. Gate B12 was already buzzing with movement. Not loud, more like a quiet shuffle of travelers finding seats, checking phones, sipping coffee with their carry-ons between their feet. Darnell scanned the space. His gate was in the far corner near a row of vending machines and a faded sign offering free Wi-Fi. He picked a seat away from the crowd. It was a little too close to the air vent, but at least it gave him room to stretch his leg without bumping into someone's roller bag. As he settled in, he heard a familiar voice across the terminal. Yeah, I was just doing my job, Corbin said. Darnell's head didn't turn, but his ears did what military ears always did. They picked up details. Corbin was leaned against the check-in counter for Gate B9, talking to another TSA agent. His voice was lower now, but not low enough. He had a chip on his shoulder, you could tell. Probably used to people walking on eggshells around him, Corbin muttered. The other agent didn't respond. Corbin kept going. These guys think because they lost a leg or something they get a free pass through security? Nah, I'm not about that. A woman a few seats down from Darnell raised her eyebrows, glanced in his direction. She wasn't sure if he heard it. He had, but he didn't move. He'd dealt with Corbins before, not always in uniform, sometimes in offices, sometimes in grocery stores. People who couldn't tell the difference between confidence and disrespect. People who wanted to shrink you just so they could feel a little bigger standing next to you. A flight announcement came through the speaker, calling boarding for another flight to Memphis. A few passengers stood and gathered their belongings. Darnell watched them line up, heads down, faces blank, everyone just trying to get where they were going. It reminded him of his last deployment, standing in line at 4 a.m. with 20 pounds of gear on his back, waiting for a C-130 that would fly them out of the hot zone. No one ever said much during those hours. Quiet was a kind of shield, a place to hide what you were really thinking. He pulled out a granola bar from his duffel, the wrapper half torn already. He'd packed it just before leaving the house. Old habits. Always have something in your bag that can get you through the wait. Just as he took a bite, he noticed movement from the corner of his eye. A pilot in a navy blue uniform had stopped a few feet away. Short-cropped silver hair, a square jaw, and shoulders that hadn't slouched in decades. He held a coffee in one hand, and his gaze was fixed in Darnell's direction. He looked familiar. Darnell squinted. No, not familiar. Familiar type. The man stepped forward. "You Jennings?" he asked, voice low but clear. Darnell stood slowly, just a bit stiff from the long walk earlier. "Yes, sir." The man smiled, offering his hand. "Captain John Kravitz. I'm flying your route today." They shook hands. Firm grip, mutual respect. "I was over by security getting coffee," the captain said. "Caught some of what happened." Darnell didn't respond right away. He just gave a polite shrug. "Wasn't the worst part of my morning," Kravitz smirked. "No, but it was out of line." He looked over his shoulder, then back at Darnell. "You mind walking with me a sec?" They moved a few feet away from the main seating area. Kravitz spoke low, with purpose. "Listen, I can't fix the way people act. Some folks get a badge and forget how to treat others. But what I can do is decide who sits where on my flight." Darnell blinked, unsure where this was going. "You ever flown first class?" He shook his head. "Well, you're about to." Before Darnell could respond, Kravitz pulled a small notepad from his coat, scribbled something, and walked it over to the gate attendant. She nodded, typed something into the computer, and reprinted his boarding pass. He came back and handed it over. "Row 2A, right side, window." Darnell looked down at the paper. Same flight, same gate, new seat. "I didn't ask for—" he started. "You didn't have to," Kravitz said. "That was just one man at security. I figure the rest of us ought to remind you what gratitude looks like." But while some gestures speak loud, it's the quiet ones that echo the longest. The boarding process began in the usual way. Families with small kids, people needing extra time, Zone 1, Zone 2. Darnell waited until he heard the announcement for first class, a phrase he'd heard over the years without ever thinking it would apply to him. Now boarding, Delta first class passengers, rows 1 through 3. He stood, adjusting the duffel strap on his shoulder, still not quite believing the little square of paper in his hand. The new boarding pass felt heavier somehow, like it came with responsibility, or maybe something more humbling than that. As he approached the gate, Corbin walked by in the other direction, probably heading to the break room or to go stand around another lane like a bored security guard in search of someone else to target. Their eyes met for a half second. Corbin looked down at the new boarding pass in Darnell's hand, then passed him toward the jet bridge where a gate attendant had just waved him through. Darnell didn't say a word, didn't need to. The moment did all the talking. As he stepped onto the plane, the flight attendants greeted him with soft smiles and polite greetings. It was the kind of thing they probably did dozens of times a day, but somehow it still felt personal. "Right this way, Mr. Jennings," one said, motioning toward the first row of seats. 2A was spacious. More room than he was used to, even more than the military transports he'd once flown in. The seat was wide, padded, the kind that leaned back more than it had any right to. A bottle of water and a clean white cloth napkin sat on the tray table, waiting like a quiet welcome. He sat down slowly, stretching out his leg with space to spare. He looked out the window, then down the aisle as passengers started boarding. A few glanced toward first class, some curious, others indifferent. A young man in a pressed blazer raised his eyebrows when he saw Darnell in the seat. "That's not first class, is it?" Darnell could almost hear the thought forming on the kid's face. The pilot, Captain Kravitz, stepped onto the plane minutes later and gave a small nod as he passed by. Not for show, just a signal. Just a man acknowledging another man. Once everyone was seated and the plane began taxiing, the flight attendant came by and whispered, "Let us know if you need anything." Darnell smiled slightly and said, "I'm good, just glad to be in the air." As the plane lifted off the tarmac, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The seat around him buzzed with activity, laptop keyboards, drink orders, quiet conversations, but none of it reached him. He was somewhere else, not just 10,000 feet in the sky, somewhere further back, somewhere deeper. Camp Nathan Smith, Kandahar, 2007. It was his second deployment. The summer heat was brutal, 110 degrees on a good day. Dust filled the air like it had a job to do, and every night he'd hear the dull thump of mortars in the distance like a heartbeat that never stopped. He remembered the day he lost his leg with painful clarity, not because of the explosion, but because of the sound that came after it, the ringing, the screaming, the silence that fell over the moment like a blanket too heavy to move. He remembered the smell of burnt fabric, the coppery taste in his mouth, the fear he pushed down so deep it never surfaced again, not even during rehab, not even when they told him he'd never run again. But he didn't need to run, he just needed to walk, forward. Back in seat 2A, he opened his eyes again. The clouds below looked like crushed chalk, scattered across a canvas too big to understand. He reached down to adjust the leg brace. The strap had loosened slightly. Years of practice made the motion quick, easy, natural. He noticed a woman across the aisle looking over, not staring, just noticing. She smiled at him, not pity, not curiosity, just kindness. He nodded once. "Thank you for your service," she said softly. He nodded again. "Thank you for noticing." But sometimes the deepest respect doesn't come in medals. It comes in the way people look at you when you're not trying to be seen. The flight leveled off somewhere over Alabama. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft ding, and the cabin settled into that strange quiet only airplanes seem to create. Not silence, but a hush, like everyone had agreed to just exist for a while. Darnell looked down at his duffel bag resting neatly under the seat in front of him. He gave it a light tap with the toe of his boot, the way someone might pat an old friend on the back. That bag had been through it all. Afghanistan, Germany, Walter Reed, then back home to Mississippi. A flight attendant stopped beside him. "Can I offer you something to drink, Mr. Jennings?" He glanced up. "Lemon water, if you've got it." "Coming right up." As she walked away, the passenger next to him leaned over, middle-aged man in a charcoal gray suit, wedding ring glinting, laptop open but untouched. "Army?" he asked. "Yeah," Darnell replied, not looking for conversation but not avoiding it either. "I thought so. My brother served, Air Force, got out in '04. "Respect to him," Darnell said. The man hesitated, then added, "I saw what happened at security. That was out of line." Darnell exhaled through his nose. "Folks don't always know what they're looking at." The man nodded slowly. "People forget there's a difference between protecting and profiling." The attendant returned with his drink, placing it gently on the tray, the condensation already collecting on the sides like a fresh memory. He took a sip, cold, clean. He looked back toward the galley, where he could just make out Captain Kravitz standing behind the curtain talking to a crew member. His hand gestures were small, controlled, the kind of movements that said the man didn't just fly planes. He kept people safe. 15 minutes passed. Then the curtain shifted. Kravitz stepped into the aisle and walked over to seat 2A. Passengers glanced up as he approached, not because he was causing a scene, but because his presence demanded attention, the way good leaders always did. "You mind if I sit for a sec?" he asked. Darnell motioned to the empty seat across the aisle. "It's yours." Kravitz sat, his cap tucked under one arm. The pilot's wings on his chest looked less like decoration and more like testimony. "Most folks don't even notice the pilot anymore," he said. "We fly the bird. Stay out of the way." Darnell shrugged. "I notice. Always have." Kravitz leaned forward a little. "I heard what that agent said to you. Don't let that ride with you too long." "I won't," Darnell said, "but I've carried heavier." Kravitz smiled. "I figured. I flew medevac during Desert Storm. I've seen what men carry. The visible stuff, and the stuff they don't talk about." He paused, glancing around at the rows behind them. "You ever think about how people look at soldiers once we come home?" "All the time." Kravitz nodded, more to himself than to Darnell. "They want to thank us sometimes. Other times they avoid us. Like, if they stare too long, they'll catch whatever we caught." "That's because they don't want to imagine being us," Darnell said. "They don't want the leg, the stories, the hospital bed." There was a silence between them. Not awkward, more like a truce. Kravitz tapped the armrest lightly. "You ain't just a passenger, Jennings. Not to me, not to the crew. You're a reminder." Darnell looked over. "Of what?" That dignity don't always wear a suit. Sometimes it walks slow, carries a duffel, and doesn't speak unless it has to. They sat there for a moment, two men from different wars, different planes, same burden. Kravitz stood, adjusted his jacket. You ever write your story down? No. Well, maybe you should. Folks need to read it. He stepped back toward the cockpit. Darnell watched him go, the curtains swaying shut behind him. But some people don't need applause. Just a place to sit, a cold drink, and someone who sees them for who they really are. The flight touched down in Atlanta with a soft jolt. As the plane taxied toward the terminal, the passengers around Darnell started gathering their things. Phones lit up, belts clicked open. The low rustle of movement filled the cabin. Darnell stayed seated, not because he needed to, just because he'd learned there was no reward in rushing to stand. Life had a way of humbling folks who always tried to be first off the line. As the plane eased to a full stop, the seatbelt sign chimed off. A woman in her 20s, 2 rows back, tapped the shoulder of the man beside her. Is that seat 2A guy the one from security earlier? He gave a small shrug, whispered something back. Darnell caught it, but again, didn't move, didn't react. He just reached under his seat, grabbed his duffel, and placed it on his lap. Then came that moment. The aisles started to shift forward, passengers bunching toward the door. Darnell stood slowly, waiting for the people ahead of him to move. When he finally stepped into the aisle, he saw him, Corbin, standing just outside the jet bridge, clipboard in hand, pretending to be checking something. He wasn't supposed to be there, not for this flight. But there he was. As Darnell stepped off the plane, Corbin saw him and straightened up, his posture stiff and overcompensating. For a brief moment, their eyes met again, and this time, Corbin looked away. He mumbled something into his radio and acted like he didn't recognize him. But the fact that he was even there, trying to make it seem like he had something to do with that gate, said more than any apology ever could. Darnell kept walking. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, just walked past the man who tried to mock him earlier, now watching him walk out of a first-class cabin, duffel over his shoulder, chin level. He reached the main terminal walkway. It was crowded, as always, but Darnell moved through it like he had somewhere to be and nowhere to rush to get there. Then a small voice called out, "Sir!" He turned. A boy, maybe 10, 11, stood beside his mother near one of the waiting areas. "Are you a soldier?" the boy asked. Darnell stepped closer. "I was." The boy looked up at him with wide eyes. "You got a robot leg?" The mother gasped. "Marcus!" But Darnell raised a hand gently, shaking his head. He knelt down, carefully, the prosthetic clicking just slightly as it bent. "Not a robot, just a helper," he said. "It reminds me where I've been." The boy nodded, chewing on that thought. "Did it hurt?" he asked. Darnell smiled, small but real. "Some things do, but hurting ain't the same as stopping." The mother looked at him with something between gratitude and awe. "Thank you," she whispered. "I mean it." He gave her a warm glance and stood back up. "Take care of him. Looks like he sees more than most." She nodded. "He does." As he walked away, Darnell couldn't help but feel it. The weight of being seen, not watched. There was a difference. One came with curiosity. The other came with care. He reached the escalator, wrote it down to baggage claim, even though he didn't check anything. Old habits. He liked the quiet down there. Fewer eyes, fewer announcements, just a moment to breathe. He sat on a bench near the exit doors. His ride wasn't due for another 15 minutes, so he just sat, letting the morning settle in his bones. The prosthetic leg ached a little, the way it always did after long flights. He adjusted the strap. Then he looked around. So many people, so many stories, and every single one of them carrying something. Grief, love, ambition, anger, memories. Some wore it on their sleeves, others kept it under the surface. But Darnell noticed. He always noticed. Because some people look, but some people truly see. The car that pulled up outside the terminal was a dusty silver Camry. No flags, no bumper stickers, just an old ride doing its job. Behind the wheel was Reggie Samuels, a longtime friend and fellow vet, now working airport pickups part-time to stay busy. When Darnell opened the back door, Reggie grinned. "Look at this man, first class and all," he teased, leaning across the seat to fist bump him. You get champagne up there or just fancy peanuts? Darnell chuckled as he slid into the car. Just water and legroom, but I'll take it. As the car pulled out into Atlanta traffic, Reggie glanced at him through the rear view. Heard about the security mess. Word travels fast. Darnell raised an eyebrow. You got sources at TSA now? Nah, but you know Cheryl's cousin works the counters. She called me after she saw you bored. Said that young punk had the nerve to clown a vet like you, loud enough for folks to hear. Darnell didn't answer right away, just looked out the window at the slow crawl of cars and buses. You mad? Reggie asked. No, not mad. Tired, Darnell replied. Tired of explaining what shouldn't need explaining. Reggie nodded. Ain't it something? We give pieces of ourselves for this country and still get asked to prove we deserve basic respect. Man didn't know me. Didn't care to, Darnell said. To him, I'm a hassle, an extra step in his day. Reggie leaned back in his seat. Well, at least someone had your back. Heard the pilot stepped up. Yeah, Darnell said, a rare softness in his voice. Kravitz said he flew medevac in Desert Storm. He saw something in me I didn't even ask him to look for. Reggie gave a low whistle. Real recognize real. Something like that. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the hum of tires on pavement filling the air between them. Then Reggie asked, You ever think about telling your story? Writing it down? Kravitz asked me the same thing. And? I don't know, Darnell said. What would I even say? You don't gotta make it pretty, Reggie replied. Just make it real. People don't know what it's like unless someone puts it in front of their face. Darnell looked down at his prosthetic. The strap was still snug. The black carbon fiber caught the sunlight that streamed through the window. You think people want to hear about pain? He asked. I think people want to understand what survival looks like, Reggie said. Not the movie kind, the everyday kind. They pulled into Darnell's driveway, a small brick house with a trimmed lawn and a porch swing that creaked with every breeze. The American flag didn't fly out front, not because he didn't care, just because he didn't need to advertise who he was. As he stepped out, Reggie leaned over. Write the story, man. Even if it's just for the kid who sees your leg and don't know whether to ask or stare. Even if it's for yourself. Darnell nodded. I'll think about it. Don't think too long, Reggie called out. The world moves fast, but truth don't age. He drove off, tires crunching over the gravel. Darnell stood on his porch for a minute, duffel still slung over his shoulder. The house was quiet inside, still. The kind of peace you don't take for granted after war. He set the bag down and went to the small office tucked behind the kitchen. The room didn't have much. Just a desk, a worn leather chair, and an old framed photo of his unit. He sat, pulled a notepad from the drawer, clicked a pen. The page stared back at him. He took a deep breath and wrote 4 words at the top. You ain't gotta march. Then paused. To still stand tall. He smiled. Because it wasn't about revenge, or pride, or proving anything. It was about reminding people that dignity doesn't ask for permission. It just is. Sometimes the biggest statement isn't loud. It's steady. It's patient. It's sitting in seat 2A while the world tries to decide what you're worth. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone, share it. Because there are Darnells everywhere. Some just need someone to see them.